We have After Ayodhya, Reinventing the Hindi Heartland. I'm really looking forward to hearing this discussion. Akshaya Mukul, Abhishek Choudhary, and Tarun Bhartiya. I'm going to give a brief introduction, but since this is from Google, I'll request all of you to add on the several points I miss out. Akshaya Mukul is an independent researcher and a Homi Bhabha Fellow. Journalist for over 2 decades, he has contributed to a historical companion to post-colonial literatures in English, edited by Prem Poddar and David Johnson. He lives in Gurgaon with his wife Jyoti, daughter Jahnavi, and Dalmatian Bella.
Dalmatian is no more.
Sorry to hear about that. Abhishek Choudhary, I hope I have the right profile for you. Studied economics in Delhi and Chennai and has worked since 2010 in development with Pratham and IGC Bihar and journalism. His writing has appeared in a range of publications, including the Anand Bazar Patrika, Caravan, Deccan Herald, HuffPost India, and Indian Express. He was awarded the New India Foundation Fellowship in 2017 to research the life of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. During the winter of 2021-22, he was a scholar in residence at the ICG. The Believer's Dilemma is his first book. And we have Tarun Bhartiya. He's a Maithil documentary image maker, Hindi poet and political activist based in Shillong, the Khasi Hills. His photographs and image essays have been published in magazines and as covers of many books. Over to the three of you.
Okay. Welcome to this conversation about these two important books. One, obviously, everyone knows would be an important book about the first right-wing Prime Minister India had, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and a book about a poet, a Hindi poet who even in Hindi now people don't really talk about him so much, but who was a very key figure for Hindi public sphere, Agace. And I love it because he was part of our textbook, our course. So his whole name is very nice to say. Sachitanand Hiranand Vatsayan Agay. So it sings. So I'm like, a last minute interlocutor between these two very interesting biographers, and especially Akshay. And when Vivek asked me, I was quite excited because Akshay is my senior and we are hostel mates. So Akshay sir, and Abhishek I didn't know. So when I was talking to him, as a Bihari, as a Maithil, on phone you know where the person comes from. So welcome to a conversation between 3 Maithils. So from Madhubani. Although the theme is After Ayodhya, Reimagining Hindi Heartland, I think that for many Anglophone Indians, they can't, they haven't even imagined Hindi Heartland. They don't even understand what Hindi Heartland is. So reimagining is like a, extra effort. So we will try through this conversation to help you, and it is a good thing that Maithils are doing this conversation because we are at the margins of Hindi Heartland. For far too long, Maithili was considered a dialect of Hindi, which we refuse to be. So this conversation is going to help you understand, and it's going to not be only about politics, but we'll talk about literature, because there is a person who is an aspiring poet who becomes the Prime Minister. There's a person who is really a poet who wanted to be as powerful as Prime Minister. So, it's going to be an interesting way to look at the world and how importance of literature, and especially for people who describe themselves as liberals and left, and who mostly speak in English or have studied in English medium thing, who have no idea, and especially if you know Akshay's first book, if you have not read it, please read it, about a press called Gita Press. I was very surprised that when recently Gita Press was given Gandhi Peace Award, people were like, oh, how could they give it to Gita Press? Because people hadn't seen Gita Press. We have grown up in my village, where my grandparents prayed. The Gita Press books are kept there, and so to understand that. So let's start with. So I would start simply as little introductory kind of things, and I want to ask Akshay sir that a gay is someone who people may not. How many of you have heard of a gay? Oh, that's a impressively.
That's quite a.
It's a literary gathering.
It's a literary
Yeah,
gathering.
it's a literary gathering.
Okay.
I'm very
But
impressed.
why don't you tell us about
Okay.
this Brahmin? Because one of the things we will talk about is the caste,
Yeah.
which is a very important thing to talk about. So, who are Sachidanand, Hiranand, Vatsyayan, a gay?
Okay, thank you, Tarun. Agay, the word means unknowable, and this was given to him by Premchand when he was when Agay was when Vatsyayan was in jail as a 19-year-old boy from Lahore. He was in Foreman Christian College, was involved in these revolutionary activities. His name was Scientist because he was supposed to be an expert on explosives. He was carried all over, and from jail he wrote this story which was smuggled out through another Hindi big writer called Janendra Kumar, and Premchand thought of publishing one called Amar Vallari in his journal called Jagaran, and that's all because his name couldn't have been carried, so he used Agay. So that's the Agay part of it. Now, Agay, unlike the Hindi writers of his generation or subsequent generation, came from a completely different stock. His father was a very senior government official. He was the chief epigraphist of India. He was an archaeologist. He is the one who excavated most of the Buddhist sites. He was the first one, in fact, to be sent to Mohenjo-daro, and he came back and said there is nothing. And unfortunately, the records of it are nowhere in the archives. So he was a big man, and Agay had a very cosmopolitan background, kind of childhood. So he's born in an open field in Kusinagar, in Uttar Pradesh, very near to Gorakhpur. And from there his father is traveling, he's getting transferred and getting new postings. So he spends a lot of his time, his intermediate years, immediately after 10th, all of them were homeschooled, and that's where his entire education comes from. He's reading things in original, he has a Persian teacher, and he has a Sanskrit teacher, and a Hindi teacher, and all that. And from there, that's the bulk of his intellectual thing is coming from his father's library, home tutors, and also the world that he sees, which is very different from the larger Mofussil, background of most of the Hindi writers. He grew up 3 years in Chennai. He goes to Madras Christian College, where he does extremely well academically, and he's winning debates, he's winning the famous Miller Prize. From there, he moves to the other extreme, Foreman Christian College, and his lifelong dream was to be a physicist. And he works with James Barnard, who was a friend of Andrew Compton, who had got, I think, in 1982 Nobel Prize, and Agay for a time even worked as a research assistant on the cosmic ray experiment somewhere in in Srinagar. Now what happens is that during this period he attends Congress session in Lahore. He doesn't like what's happening, moves towards revolutionaries, gets into jail, and that's where his literary career starts. And that's where he writes his first novel, which became an iconic novel in the 40s, called Sekhar Ek Jibni. It's the first novel in Hindi novel, or probably across languages, which was in 2 parts. 41 is the first volume, 44 is the second volume, and that completely shook the Hindi literary establishment. And then he's a man full of contradictions. So he's a man who's in jail in the 20s and in the late 20s, joins British Army. And Marxists never spared him for that. He joins British Army during the Second World War, and post 47, when Congress for Cultural Freedom starts, he is one of the key players of organizing the first meeting in Bombay. And much later,
Congress for Cultural Freedom was a CIA fund.
yeah, it was a CIA-funded front to deal with the rising, communism, and like Americans were really kind of paranoid about it. So from there, Agay becomes that, and much later in the 70s, by then he had become a messiah, and like all messiahs, he had surrounded himself with very, very mediocre poets and writers, and then what happens is he gravitates towards what he called search of Indianness stroke Hinduness. He is there when the BJP is formed in 1980. He is one of the, the invitee. When he was invited by Advani and Advani, I guess. And then, so that's a lifelong journey. And apart from this, he also led a fascinating love life, which we find in Sekhar Ek Jibni, which also included, it talks of a relationship with the protagonist's own cousin, first cousin. And people thought it's imaginary, but actually when you dig into his archives, you find it was real. He was actually having relationship with his first cousin. And that shadowed his subsequent relationship, be it with absolutely brilliant woman called Kripa Sen. Later on, before that, Santosh, who later became Balraj Sahni's wife, after they got divorced, he married Balraj Sahni. Balraj Sahni and Santosh themselves were first cousins. That's another story. But so he led this, and later on he was with Ila Dalmia, who was 33 years younger to him when he died. So literally he marks completely the modernism of Hindi literature. Sekhar, then Tar Saptak, which completely again changed, and this happens almost in succession with Sekhar. So he completely revolutionized Hindi literature, and even now we find legatees of very poor legatees, very mediocre legatees of Agya all around us. So he's very much part of it. Yeah.
So picking up from this journey of a cosmopolitan into the muck of the Hindu right, if you want to call it that. I would like to call it that. But anyway, here is another person, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and he makes a slightly different journey. He's not a cosmopolitan. He's born into a very conservative kind of a, princely state Hindu culture.
Yeah.
And what really, I'm always amused when liberals, people like us, they say, if Vajpayee was here now, things would have been different, because he was supposed to be a person who loved his drink, and he had a also interesting love life, unlike someone who bills himself as no love life. So can you just quickly tell us that about origins of this Brahmin man, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee?
Okay, I'll first begin with a macro picture, because the topic is reinventing the Hindi heartland, and I'll begin with a small caveat, which is that though Hindi heartland is semi-feudal in many ways, in most ways, many would say, and certainly lacking in social and economic innovation, and actually, I mean, when I got Vivek's mail, I was amused and I was annoyed, and it was a mix of amusement and annoyance, because I do have, on my computer a folder subtitled "The Stunning Dysfunction of Hindi Heartland," for a future project. But again, the approach to it, how exactly do you go about it, is what I have to figure out. So yeah, it was, but I thought it was an opportunity to maybe think a little deeply about that subject, which is also, despite cliches, remains much misunderstood. I mean, all three of us, we were joking that all three of us here are Maithils. And Maithils are basically a community in certain districts of Bihar, eastern Bihar. Culturally, we share much more in common with Madhesis of Nepal, across the border. And we share, in some ways, culturally, we share very little with the Bhojpuri speakers in western Bihar, like people from Ara or Chhapra, who again in turn share more in common with people across the border in UP, the Ghazipur, Balia, Devariya, Sonbhadra. So in Hindi heartland, much of, like in southern states, it was more like states are by and large linguistic states. In Hindi heartland, even in Bihar, it's more of an administrative state. So that is one thing I wanted to say at the very beginning, because I mean, it will come back to it later. Secondly, I also think Hindutva is not synonymous with, though there are overlaps, it's not synonymous with Hindi heartland. I mean, intellectually, one could argue, I would certainly argue that Hindutva began in Western India. I mean, Arya Samaj was founded by a Gujarati in Bombay in 1875. And RSS, which in some ways, I certainly argue in my book that it is a successor of Arya Samaj. It was founded 50 years later by a bunch of Tilakites because they were Chitpavans. Right. No, I'm generally talking of, I mean, yeah, they were Nagpur Brahmins, Chitpavan Brahmins, a bunch of Chitpavan Brahmins from Nagpur who were disenchanted with Gandhi. They came together to form the RSS. And intellectually also, you know, they borrowed from nationalists in Bengal, and one of the first major leaders of Hindu right was Syama Prasad Mukherjee. I mean, he did not have a long life. So I think it's more complicated, and you know, I think Mr. Modi's, before he came to power at the center, India's most successful laboratory, and Amrita Shah has written a book about it, it came from Gujarat. And also there are other kinds of complexities, like in Bihar has never had a Hindu majority government, BJP government in that sense. It is far too complicated, OBC politics and socialist politics. But now you see that, I mean, they are still trying in Bihar. They've been trying for 30 years, and trying really desperately hard, actually for 50 years, since the 70s actually. But now you see that, you know, BJP has also captured so many other parts of India. BJP has a government in Assam, it has a government in Tripura, it also has a government in where we are sitting right now in Goa. So, yeah, I think we need to, at this point, reclaim all of India. So it's not just about the Hindi heartland. There are overlaps, but it will be a gross oversimplification to blame Hindi heartland for all of India's woes, is what I'm trying to say. Coming to Vajpayee, well, Vajpayee was born in an Arya Samaji family. And as a child, he obsessively consumed the Arya Samaji version of history, which was basically, in that narrative, it was a very deep, unresolved kind of inferiority complex vis-a-vis, especially Islam, but also Christianity and British. And in that version of history, the history of India was primarily the history of Hindus, and they interpreted that the history of India as the one of with constant struggle with Islam. And you know, if you read, the tone is that, oh, we never surrendered to Islam, we never surrendered to British, we never lost to British, but we were constantly struggling, but we were also occasionally winning. So it is written, the literature is always is written, early 20th century nationalist literature in Hindi sphere, the Arya Samaj inspired literature is always written in that tone. And Vajpayee, as a child, he obsessively consumed. He was reading Arya Samaji weeklies like Veer Arjun, which he also briefly edited later. It keeps getting shut down, but someone keeps opening it. He was reading Kesari, which was basically a Marathi daily. Still, I think it's still very much in print, founded by Tilak. He was reading plays and historical novels based on the lives of Maharana Pratap and Jhansi Ki Rani, Lakshmi Bai, and so on. And I was just flipping through one of those novels, and you know, the tone is that they do recount Lakshmi Bai's painful defeat and eventual death, but it is also written in a sense to glorify Lakshmi Bai, talk about her sacrifice, and there's so many what ifs. So it also, you know, the novel format kind of reimagines what could have been an alternate history of Win. And you know, so it is an odd mix of pride and a very deep inferiority complex. So that's what, even at a larger level, you see that kind of those elements in Hindutva. And this was the kind of literature Vajpayee studied in his childhood, and that reflects in his early poems. I mean, I think one of the most popular Hindutva poems continues to be Vajpayee's Hindu Tanman, Hindu Jivan, Rag Rag Hindu Mera Parichay. You know, it continued to be, and that he wrote first at the age of 16. But when he was in college, as it often happens in high school and college, people also read Marx. And and so some of his early poems are a very confused blend of Arya Samaj and Marxism. So one of his early poems is about Taj Mahal, or more precisely, the exploitation of Hindu workers by Mughals in the construction of Taj Mahal. It's a really, I mean, we laugh at it, but you can see there's an intense sense of victimhood. He's writing, यह ताज महल यमुना की रोती धार विकल तब बन पाया यह ताज महल जब रोया हिंदुस्तान सकल तब बन पाया यह ताजमहल. So very intense kind of like hardcore victimhood that he has. But even that brief flirtation, it in the late 30s and early 40s, it ended in 45 after Muslim League won the provincial election, and it became certain, partition became a kind of certainty. Then he tried his hand as an RSS pracharak, but he was physically too fragile to do the groundwork. He fell sick. And then he was brought to, after he finished his MA in 47, in August, RSS was trying to launch its mouthpieces, and that's how he got that job as a co-editor of Rashdharm, which was the Sangh Parivar's first mouthpiece in Hindi. And that's where he excelled. That's where, he was everything from an editor, writer, typesetter, delivery boy, and he kind of grew into that role. And 6 months later, because it became big, 6 months later, they also launched Panchajanya, and they were like, they were rabidly communal. They were cursing Gandhi all the time. They were saying all Muslims in India who've chosen to stay back are fifth columnists and so on. And which is why when Gandhi was murdered, if some of you remember, the main charge against the RSS was not that they killed Gandhi. The main charge against the RSS was that they helped create an environment in which Gandhi was murdered. And in that sense, Vajpayee was very much at the heart of that enterprise. He was editing two mouthpieces which were exactly doing that. They were trying to create a mahal, so to speak, in which any refugee who'd come from, East Pakistan, or a Punjabi Khatri refugee would have come and shot dead Mahatma. So those were the things. Only in the late 50s after, and this went on for a while, only in the late 50s after he became an MP, and they were basically a tiny group. There were 4 people in a parliament of more than 500. And so then his worldview began to, expand. And because he interacted with communists, he also got personally close to Nehru at some point. Nehru helped him, was the person who sent him to America for a study tour, and he went to West Europe, and he saw that, in America, for example, he traveled to small towns, and he saw there were people from 35 ethnic, nationalities living together, and he saw for himself, the poet of Hindu Tanman Dhan, saw the proof of a multi-ethnic society living pretty happily in America. And those are the kind of things that at a personal level began to change him. And also he's around the same time in the late 50s, he'd had a very passionate love affair that would last a lifetime, and that also kind of affected the kind of poems he was writing. And from a very virus kind of poetry, he started writing more Sringar, self-reflective or melancholic, kind of very autobiographical poems. They are some of them are rather very third-rate, but but yeah.
Let me come in and ask Akshat about the Mahal 47 post-independence Mahal, and someone like a gay who is an experimentalist and who is at a certainly at a tangential relationship to the conservative Hindu world. So someone like a gay, how does he handle this new Nehruvian Mahal?
See, in 47 he is in Allahabad, and he has started something which was like never happened in Hindi world or any language. He started a commune in Allahabad. He had just started after the Second World War, sold whatever money he got from army and whatever belongings he had, including clothes, he had sold, and started a commune where there were some of these Marxist writers, journalists, and started Pratik. And some of the best poems on partition you will find Agge's poems, which are very not well known and not translated, Sarnarthi poems they're called. he even takes a family of a distant relative from what had become Pakistan. They had come, and he had taken, in fact, he's in deep conversation with M.N. Roy, who was his mentor in many, many ways, that what do? I don't have money, I have this, and he had taken up a work which had just started then on Nehru's commemorative volume. So he had become one of the editors, some money was coming from there. But by and large, you find Hindi world is kind of caught in their own pettiness. The 40, if you're talking about the 47, Agay is trying to establish himself. His Nadi Ke Dweep is still few years away, which later you realize is far more iconic than say Kharik Jivni. And everyone is trying to grab something or the other. Agay had a very deep personal relationship with Nehru. In the 20s, as a very young man, when he wrote his first set of English poems called Prison Poems, which got published in Asia Journal in New York first, he chasing Nehru to write the introduction, which Nehru did eventually after long, because the election was happening, and Nehru wrote in the 30s. It happened in the 30s. Then, so Nehru is his personal hero right throughout. He's very critical of Congress throughout. He never comes. But still, that's one thing which defines or kind of Agay stands out from rest of his generation, that he never hankers after any state thing. He, in fact, applies for a job in AIR, and in a New Republic, they tell him that he doesn't qualify because there is some age issue, some education issue. So he gets rejected. He never goes back to Nehru. And Nehru was always available for him. So very quickly you find that there is a great deal of frustration and anger with the way the New Republic is shaping up. And 20 years later, in I think sometime in 67, he wrote a poem which is like one of his most, it's called 20 Baras Baad, which tells you about what has gone wrong the 20 years of independence. And throughout that, and that's also a period when he's traveling a lot throughout India, and he's writing about this whole two worlds which we have created, how this independence has been misunderstood, and he gravitates towards socialists a lot. And leftists always hated him, and it was mutual, but he's gravitating towards people like Jayaprakash Narayan, Lohia, Dinman comes up in the mid-60s, and that completely changes the complex. So much so that Indira Gandhi complains to Times of India owners, saying that how come socialists are on the cover of Times of India all the time. But he put Bajpayee on the first time on the cover of Dinman, Agay put it, which later a lot of people think that Raghuveer Sahai did it. No, it was Agay who did it. But then he had put everyone on cover. Lohia is very excited that he's on the cover of a magazine, socialist, and he's giving really tough time to Nehru, and yet he's on the cover. So this is a very, very interesting time. Agay is trying to just figure himself out. He doesn't get any job. He's a freelance writer, getting one job of this. Dharamyug had approached him to do job, which he said no, and that job went to Tarun Bhartiya. He's the one who recommended Tarun Bhartiya. So it's a period of intense churning, and this is also the time when he thinks that going abroad is very important. Translation, world literature has to be brought to India in translation, and Indian literature, Hindi literature particularly, has to go to the world in translation. And that's how some of the biggest initiatives in translation happens, be it collaborating with someone like Josephine Miles, who had found, this one, Allen Ginsberg. She had suggested Lawrence Ferlinghetti to publish Allen Ginsberg. So he becomes internationalist completely. And he's publishing a lot, he's selling a lot, and he's making a lot of money just by sales. If you go to the royalty figures of Agay, it's mind-boggling. In 40s and 50s, he's making something like $5,000, $15,000. It's a lot of money in that time. And again, with Agay always, there was this side of Agay which was, he always had women who took care of him. Right through his relationship, there were the women who were willing to give up everything to take care of him, be it his first wife, his second wife, or even his partner, this for a brief while, Kripa Sen. So he's leading a very, very interesting life, and yet he's frustrated with what's happening in literature and what's happening around the country. And a larger thing is that he's very, very frustrated with the pettiness of the Hindi world. Though by late 60s and early 70s, he himself becomes a messiah and he's doing almost the same thing to the... So he's most upset with the death of Nehru. One of the best pieces on Nehru he writes after his death in Dinman. And also, there is a side of Agge. We find his closeness to this Hindu world in the 70s. But one of the best critique of RSS, he writes in Dinman, where he says, na Rashtriya hai, na Sangh hai, na Sevak hai, about RSS. And he writes one-page editorial called Hindutva Kya Hai. My God, everyone should read it, and it should be tried. In fact, I've been telling a friend of mine to translate it. No one has come even close to that.
Which year was this?
This is sometime in the 60s. Yeah. He writes and he just completely destroys them. And he's very clear. So later on also, if we see in the 70s, when he's raising questions on secularism, much of it we find others are doing it. He's raising some very basic things. But then he turns ritualistic. A man who always went to temple to see only the architecture is suddenly worried whether a tree should be planted on a certain date at a certain time in a certain direction. He's even doing havan for long life in Bikaner in a temple. Half a day he's doing havan, this was not the Agge one knew. There is a complete lack of religion in his works.
But this happened much later, right? No?
This ritualistic thing in the 70s. The 70s are there.
We'll come to this, which is very pertinent to our times when people are considering making their way towards the right-wing culture, and who may not know, but there is a prehistory to that. And we'll come to that 70s, and there is a very famous journey. Some of the key Hindi writers, including a person who's has become legendary because people have started writing about him in English, Nirmal Verma, Agge, there is a very famous yatra called Ram Janki Yatra, and they go around North India trying to look for sites of Ram. So we'll come to that. Yeah. And because that has a certain kind of lesson for our times, So we're sticking with Nehru because Nehru and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, one of the things which people talk about is his closeness to Nehru. And on the other hand, the conservative end of Indian politics has always thought about Nehru as something, as someone whose lifestyle to his vision is totally contrary to what they want to achieve. And even he's demonized, even these days, about the Nehruvian world is considered to be what India shouldn't have been. So what is this relationship? Is it mythical? Because there are so many myths about Atal Bihari Vajpayee that one doesn't know how to separate them. Where was he born to? So his relationship to Nehru, does he admire him, or it is something which he's an...
It's a deeply complicated relationship. Certainly, till the day he became a parliamentarian, he hated Nehru. There's absolutely no question about that. And that is like till his early 30s. And as I said, that Nehru was one person, and the cliche goes, Nehru was the person who predicted that Vajpayee would become a prime minister. That never happened, and I tried debunking that in the book. Because, if there was one person with the moral clarity and the intellectual clarity about what RSS at its worst do to India, it was Nehru, and no one else in his cabinet. And which is why to think that Nehru would say Vajpayee would become a prime minister, knowing that it will be a government of Sangh Parivar, so I don't think Nehru ever did that. But yes, after Vajpayee came to parliament, and they kind of hit it off personally, on the sidelines, and that too, like eventually after a few years. And Nehru also began to, they still fought a lot in parliament. And in fact, Vajpayee used to attack him on the foreign policy like pretty much every week. But Nehru was also quite a sport. He was also an immensely self-confident man. And on some occasions, and Vajpayee used to talk about it in public later, that after one such speech, in which he attacked Nehru on the Tibet question, and he was being grilled at that point by everybody. But that man had something. In the evening they met at a banquet, and he said कि आज तो तुमने अच्छा बहुत अच्छा बोला, मेरी काफी मेरी तुमने खिंचाई की. So he was a large-hearted man in that sense. But I also think towards the end, because Nehru had fallen out, or others had fallen out with Nehru, like his old friends, certainly JP, on whom Akshay is writing a book, but also JP was never a parliamentarian, but inside the parliament he was being attacked by someone like Acharya Kriplani, who again a very curious character, doesn't yet has a biographer of his own.
Yes.
But those people, and Rajaji and Minu Masani formed something called Swatantra Party, like an economic right political party. So by early 60s, Nehru also, like many of his friends, had turned into his enemies. And in that scenario, Vajpayee was one of the people who, it's rather very odd and in some ways perverse, given his politics, that he used to end up defending Nehru. When there was China war, Kriplani was asking for his head. Kriplani was saying Nehru should resign. And very subtly, Vajpayee argued that no, he is our commander-in-chief, and at this time of crisis, he should not resign. And it's very interesting that in 63, when Kriplani, socialists made the first ever no-confidence motion in parliament, in Lok Sabha, it's very interesting that, Janasanghis attacked Nehru when the debate was going on, and yet when the vote was taken, Janasanghis abstained, and they were saying we'll vote against. And socialists were rather very pissed off. They were like, why did you not? And I do think, I have no great evidence, but I do think it was Vajpayee who had convinced his folks ki chalo yaar, rehne do, let's just abstain. So there was that a bit of softness between them, but by and large, and also by early 60s, Nehru knew that half of his party people were Sanghis themselves. They were really, and they were themselves using some of, at the state level, basically, you go to state levels in North India, wherever, and also bits and pieces of, Maharashtra and Gujarat, it was full of conservative people, and on so many issues, what Janasanghis were preaching, they were advocating more or less the same thing. They wanted to Sanskritize Hindi. They wanted a law against crop protection. Yeah, everybody in Lucknow and Bhopal and Patna wanted a law against, the Congresses wanted a law against crop protection. They were really scared of what the communists were going to do after the communist revolution in China in 49. And that was part of the reason why Janasanghis did not succeed early on. So it was a very complicated relationship, but most certainly I can say, if there was one thing that Nehru would not have wanted, the man did not have a great sense of caste, but he had read his history properly. He had read the European movements, the Nazi and the fascist movements of Europe, and he could see what RSS was up to in a way no one else could see. And he knew that if there's one thing that India should not fall into, it should be the the Hindu right politics. So yeah, it was a complicated relationship.
This Nehru thing, and one of the shadows which falls over both the books is something which we have forgotten after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The whole Cold War, which India was one of the primary battlegrounds of that Cold War, and especially a kind of a part shake of Cold War, which Agay was at that level. In terms of running Congress for Cultural Freedom, his influence in other Indian languages, to even Vajpayee, where he's attacking Nehru on his foreign policy. Foreign policy is central to this. What do you think? Do you think in terms of, because I haven't really read any interesting book about Cold War in Indian thing. What do you think that impact of Cold War was?
It started, and like all over the world, one of the way of dealing was going through the whole cultural world. You see it all over. Encounter gets launched in London. In India, we have Quest, which comes much later. Nissim Ezekiel is editing it. So they entered and they came right. See, 1950 is when CCF gets formed in Berlin. 1951 is the first meeting to be held in India, and which was like completely mind-boggling, and it was started by DRS, which was run by Minu Masani in Bombay. And first it was to be held in Delhi. Nehru got a wind of it. He said, look, and just before that, what had happened, a Marxist conference in Delhi was cancelled by the government. Government said, you cannot have it. And he used that to tell these guys, look, I'm being completely neutral. We are not allowing you. But within a week, it shifts to Bombay. And everyone, you name it, is there in that meeting. Arthur Koestler comes from London, England, I think. And whole James Burnham comes. And a whole lot of people in India, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, B.R. Ambedkar, and even Nehru's cabinet colleague. Ken Kadju comes, and Ken Kadju and Jayaprakash Narayan is heading it. Actually, he gives the keynote address. It starts from there. Somehow JP, Agay's relationship with it, personal relationship, ends on a very bitter note. When, sorry, when allegation of some money, something, with money is made and he lives, but he maintains lifelong relationship with these people. He's convinced Marxists. This alternate vision, the vision of these people, the CCF is the real vision, and that's what it will work. And so he has friends like Nicholas Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov's cousin. He has friends like James Burnham, who is like one of the leading American philosopher, and he's the pointsman to put in money in CCF in India. And again, maintains his personal relationship that helps. They are the people who are responsible for publishing the first modern Hindi anthology from Indiana University Press, and they're constantly interested in this world. If you read Diary of a Gentleman called Shadbourne Gilpatrick, you'll be shocked how deeply they had entered our lives, especially the world of academia, journalism, and literature. Who should go get admission where? Who should get job where? Is Hyderabad a good place for agriculture or not? What's happening in the English department of Delhi University? Why IIC membership is very important. And Shadbourne Gilpatrick is almost like a little viceroy sitting in Delhi, and everyone is seeking favor, and money is coming through these various routes. Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. If you see Rockefeller Archives in New York, it's shocking. Many idols and many people we adored and we read, they just all fall flat. And another thing which happened was, with this larger change, was the M.N. Roy, who is a radical humanist and who's closest to Agay, and he's also he and Ellen are close to Nehru. Everyone who was advocating radical humanism walks into the waiting arms of Americans. Everyone, you name them, they are either in Australia or they got good positions, teaching, whatever, in US. So there is a complete chaos. But parallelly, what has also happened, that while much has been written on what CCF was doing, a parallel world of what Russians were doing has not been written. There is a whole lot of writers, poets, painters, politicians who were taking favors from there. I remember childhood, this Soviet Land Award was giving, so many Hindi writers I know were getting Soviet Land Award.
From a family where children, some of my relatives went to Russia to study medicine because their parents were communist rule-timers. So I understand. So
it's somehow it's not very balanced. But what definitely happened, that it had a long impact. These people, now when New York Times did the expose in the late 60s and again in the early 70s, and everyone's name came out from Jayaprakash Narayan to Agay, because Agay had left much earlier. So there was this kind of sense of disbelief. No, it's not true. We didn't know, but everyone somewhere knew that how is this otherwise happening. So this cultural and simultaneously there is this whole politics of the Nehruvian world of the academies. Who grabs the 3 academies? And that's the most of bitterest politics is being played out on who gets what or not. And Nehru and Radhakrishnan, the 2 people who are kind of initially giving the vision to these 3 academies, are trying to, more they try to keep away from it, more you will find they're involved in it. So there's this whole stories of Tashkent conference, what happens, Marxists are beating the liberals, in somewhere else, someone else is beating. So it's kind of, it's a bad world then, but yeah. And Agay is very much involved. Then, therefore, he becomes a big advocate of state becoming invisible, just completely vanishing from the world of art, literature, poets, everything, which of course doesn't happen.
So my penultimate question before we open it out, a quick one. So Vajpayee, obviously this myth of he would be a prime minister one day. And in terms of the world he inhabits, the conservative world, how do they prepare? I've always been mystified between this successful Advani who led a Rath Yatra and Vajpayee becoming the prime minister. So is there some way in which Hindu right why does it consider Vajpayee to be a better prime ministerial material in that sense?
Well, it's still a work in progress because I'm just going to publish the second volume. But no, I think Vajpayee's cumulative CV was more acceptable than Advani.
Acceptable to whom?
Acceptable to the general voter, to the ordinary voter. And it was like this. Look, Advani had been his protege for the longest time. And if you remember, Vajpayee fought his first Lok Sabha election in 1955. Advani he had been a backroom boy. He fought his first election in 89. So if that is a measure of popularity, Vajpayee was elder to him by almost 35 years in that sense. Till the late 80s, he had been a backroom boy, and it was only because Vajpayee kind of fell off with the Sangh Parivar in the mid 80s that he almost it was open, the field was open for him, and at first he stepped into it rather very reluctantly. So that happened, but yes, I mean Advani's rise was also swift. Like he becomes the leader of opposition in 90, and he takes the Rath Yatra. It was all sudden, like towards the end of 89, he wins his first election, first popular Lok Sabha election, and then by mid 90, he's already planning a Rath Yatra. But after the demolition, again, his stars suddenly dipped. So his stardom was of a very brief 3-year period, because then Advani was locked up in jail. Basically, he was arrested after the demolition. And not many people remember that, Vajpayee in those days, he was vacillating. On one hand, he would say, nahi, ye nahi hona chahiye tha, to liberal press. On the other hand, it's online. I think everybody should read the debate of 16 December 1992. And he, very vociferously defended Sangh Parivar. And till that point, they had been saying, it's Ayodhya to hamare is about our cultural renaissance and so on. And for the first time, Vajpayee admitted in his Lok Sabha speech that no, it is a political project. And if you want to tackle us, you have to, it is our politics. So that happened, and I think over time, Vajpayee had a CV he understood foreign policy well. He was sent abroad. He defended India in Geneva in 94. He started also because he was bitter because his party had, he was also an opportunistic man who saw that, okay, if being a liberal, being a moderate is not working, and Ayodhya is paying off for BJP, I should also benefit out of it. So there was that very opportunistic side to Vajpayee too, and which is why in the early 90s, very subtly, he was playing his cards, and he was trying to improve his CV. He published 3 decades in Parliament, and then only a few years later, even before he completed 40 years in Parliament, he got his friend Appa Ghatade to publish 4 decades in Parliament. He published books of poetry, so he was all around. If there was a crisis in party, Advani's fortunes had dipped, and he again, thereafter he could never rise up. If there was a crisis in Gujarat in 95, famously, the Waghela crisis, so Vajpayee went and sorted it out. So he kind of, he became the most popular figure once again, and it was very odd that, even though he had been in background for much of the Ayodhya movement, in the end, by the end of 95, he snatched away. So the cliche goes that Advani kind of gifted him, it was out of generosity. But I think Vajpayee, in some ways, deep inside, psychologically, Advani realized that, okay, this guy had been my mentor for 3 decades and 4 decades. And maybe he should lead the party if we come in power, and I will, if I'm lucky enough, I'll have my time, which never came. That's another story. But that was the.
I'm breaking my promise because it's only 5 minutes. I thought that you would like to ask questions, so we can take 2, 3, whatever questions. But we have only 5 minutes. But better still, buy these 2 books. They are fascinating. This book, I'm reading the PDF of it. I hadn't bought it. I got a pirated version. I've read half of it. This one is obviously very fascinating. Any questions?
I think you just take all the questions and they can answer them later.
Yes.
One side and one go. Okay, yes. Questions?
Your promise to talk about the tour of the writing.
Yeah, that happened after, I'll tell you very briefly, that happened immediately after he got Gyanpit. He set up a trust called Vatsal Nidhi, and he started this, what was called yatras, and they will all go to religious place, and that's why he starts rediscovering, what Tarun was mentioning, Jan Janki Yatra. So it starts in Bihar, in Sitamarhi, ends in Ayodhya, and you find writers like Narendra Kohli, and it's very interesting actually, they brought out a book on it. Narendra Kohli is saying, I'm so pained to see what has happened to Ayodhya. He wrote 4-part series in Saptahik Hindustan, which was a kind of a competitor to Dharmyug. And Amrit Lal Nagar, being what he was, he's saying he never touched a soul in Ayodhya. Every panda is a fraud. My God, he was like his usual, all over the place, and he was also part of that. So you find a lot of these issues are being flagged in this yatra. Somnath, they look at the places they are going. They go to Somnath, it's a long yatra. They go to Jammu. They go to Jan Janki Yatra. 4 or 5 happened. Even after his death, the year he died, his partner tried to do one in Simla. But by then, and she called someone like Daya Pawar comes for the first time. You find its whole complex is changing, but she couldn't kind of continue with it. But that was the key moment in Agay's life when this whole closeness to Hinduness and this thing happened. And this is all kind of, suddenly he rediscovered places he had seen as in his youth. He's saying, oh, I never saw this. He was an archaeologist's son. His father set up the Baroda archaeology department. Maharaja had called him after he retired from government. And his father was also involved in it. Suddenly he says, oh, I found this in Somnath. It pains me this much. And you find him gravitating. He's meeting that kind of people. He even releases a book with this one, Malkani, who was governor, K.R. Malkani, on the disappearance of Hindus in Pakistan. It's a complete pamphlet. So he's become part of that. So so that's how the yatra started, and it's remained part of his life for the last 10 years of his life.
One brief question here.
Yeah.
Hi, Abhishek, this is a question for you. Whatever Vajpayee's politics are or were, in his writings, did he fear what the RSS would become after its peak? Have you come across any writings of his?
Pardon?
So the question is to you, and everybody's planning for RSS the peak, Modi,
Right.
Did Vajpayee see a darker end to the RSS or a darker future? Should they go down different paths than his envisioned?
I'm not sure if he ever imagined that they would, be so wildly successful at some point of time. I'm not sure he could see that. Did he care? Again, I'm not very sure, because if you read his early writings, Vajpayee was as rabid as, in his youth, like what he was writing in the autumn of 1947-48. Well, in his defense, he could say I was only 22, and it was a really tough time. Millions of people were displaced, and lakhs were killed. It was a tough time, but seen from this moment, if you see it, he was a rabidly communal person. So I'm not sure he would be all that sad about what is happening right now. So no. So in that sense, his legacy is by and large will remain checkered. Yeah, if that answers the question.
1 second. Last question. Why don't we listen to both the questions and then you.
So, you made a remark that Agay was lucky or unlucky in women supporting him with all that they had, including Ila Dalmia and all the way. I think same applies to Akshaya's women, or rather Vajpayee's women. That
Let's not talk about Abhishek.
अभी तो दोनों आप ही के हो गए हैं. तो मेरा कहने का ये मतलब कि ऐसा क्या है इन विभूतियों में? What is it in them? No, let me finish. What is it in them that we can learn, that women can support us so completely?
Okay. See, this is some unfortunate.
The live stream may be interrupted.
more interesting question. Mine is very boring. Just wanted your comment about Vajpayee's sort of snide remark in the BJP conference about chief ministership of Modi ji after Godhra. What impact that had, and you know what I mean.
Take the question.
Each of you take your time. Last one.
Okay, so it's just two questions. About Vajpayee, he had primarily one woman in his life, and they remained lifelong partners. Look, Vajpayee's parents had died very young of cancer in 50s, and at a time when we did not even understand what cancer meant. So he was a celebrity, and yet emotionally he was a man-child. And so, it's a very lonely state to be a celebrity on one hand, and all the women in his surroundings were already married. He was in mid-30s. It was at that point that this woman entered his life, and she brought a sense of family to Vajpayee's life, which was much required. So I don't think she's had a major intellectual influence over him. I don't think, but yes, I mean, bringing someone a sense of family to somebody who's never had one I think is a very significant contribution. That's one. Yeah. Sir, your question on the Raj Dharma remark, it was actually a double-edged remark. In the sense, it was a deliberately ambiguous remark, and by early 2002, BJP had lost all the elections. So the Gujarat was the only major state where they had a government. And the remark you're talking of took place in April. That was 5 weeks after the riots started on 28th of February in 2002. So Mr. Vajpayee initially wanted to sack Modi for sure, but he saw that everyone else was rather very vociferously opposed to it, and he was in very subtle ways told that, look, you were saying that you will be aapki tabiyat theek nahi rehti hai, so why don't you retire? So he was getting suggestions that Modi was not going. If at all someone had to go, he should maybe, he's been in power for 4 years, you should go to Rashtrapati Bhavan, we'll be happy. There was a presidential election due, by the way. Kalam became that very summer. So he was very subtly being suggested to basically retire from politics, which of course, no person in power wants to retire. In India, nobody wants to retire, especially if you're a prime minister, with in such high executive post. So, but basically he was told that, okay, Modi is not going anywhere. If you want to resign, you are most welcome to. And so what did he do? He goes to Gujarat after a month, more than a month after the riot started, and then he had to say something. So basically that question, now if I may reveal that I'm going to write in details, that question was actually planted by PMO. Okay, a PMO asked a friendly scribe to ask that question, ki what is your message for the Gujarat chief minister? And then he gave a very deliberately vague saying, that Raj Dharma speech, a ruler cannot discriminate between its citizen. But then there was a spin when Modi says, कि मैं तो वही कर रहा हूँ, then he also says कि हाँ, I'm pretty, मतलब मोदी वही कर रहे हैं. So it was a deliberately ambiguous remark, and for which he was praised, but I mean nothing came of it. I mean Modi did not get sacked. I mean, if at all, very famously 10 days later he made a speech in Goa. So that was also in some ways a concession to his core constituency. So I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yes, so as for what men should do, I don't know. And I don't think these are easily acquired or acquired at all. You're born with them. Agge definitely had this. And I spent quite a lot of time talking to some of these women who were in the 70s and 80s. If some woman tells you that, look, it's in Frankfurt, this happened. She's stepping out for the Frankfurt book fair. She's stepping out of the hotel. Agge tells her, where are you going? He said, I'm going to meet someone. He said, oh, let's have a coffee and then you leave. He said, by the time I see my watch, it's 2:30. I said, what happened at that time? He said, we were in cafe. I said, why were you so attracted to her? And look, again, the age gap. She was very young then. This is 86 or 85 actually. And she says, I don't know. I've asked innumerable women, what was it about? Why did it work? And someone said, look, don't psychoanalyze him, just write this. Even women don't know what was it. But he was very extractive with his women. Very, very extractive emotionally, and these were some of the brightest women you could think of. Kapila Vatsyayan went to universities on scholarship at a time. She came from a big family, that part. She was exceptionally gifted woman herself. one of the first PhDs on dance. And you find in the conversation that the private letters, she's just, I don't know, you cry when you see these letters. In every time she goes abroad, she's buying pajamas for him and tapes for him. And when he's abroad, she's packing off daily newspapers to him in Berkeley. So I don't know this man, and then 33 years younger, entire Dalmia family, and I know her, the family, and they were saying that, look, family said, what are you doing? Her father, who himself, Ila Dalmia's father, who had 6 wives, was also opposed to it. He said, look, don't do this is bad. And she fell for it, and even, it's not that the story ends with Ila Dalmia. There are innumerable tales how Ila Dalmia spent life in utter misery. 9 months before he dies, there is a letter she writes to him. What is it about this man? She says, तुम जो कहोगे मैं वही करूँगी, तुम मुझे चुप रहने बोलोगे मैं चुप रहूँगी. She's a very gifted lady. Forget being a Dalmia family or in. So this is something unfortunately cannot be acquired.
On that note, I want to thank Akshay and Abhishek, and please get the book.
Amazing session, amazing books. Please keep your seat for the next session as well. Thank you so much for an outstanding moderation job, Tarun. What a wonderful session. Thank you.